If you can master these 4 things, what you say, how you feel, what you spend, and where your attention goes, you become almost impossible to manipulate, provoke, or break. That's the promise of this video, and I'm not going to waste your time getting there. Picture the version of you that exists 6 months from now. Calmer in arguments, richer by accident, harder to insult, and somehow lighter, like you put down a bag you'd been carrying so long you forgot it was heavy. Here's the uncomfortable part. Most people who try to build this kind of self-mastery do it backwards, gripping tighter on all 4 fronts. And later in this video I'll show you exactly why that approach quietly sabotages them. For now, type the word mastery in the comments if you're ready to actually hear this instead of just nodding along. You already know what it feels like to lose. Not lose money, not lose a game, lose yourself in the small ways that add up. Someone cuts you off in traffic and you're gripping the wheel, muttering things you'd never say to their face, and somehow they've rented 10 minutes of your morning for free. Someone at work sends a message with just enough edge in it and you read it 4 times, drafting a reply in your head that you'll never send, and by lunch you're irritable with people who did nothing wrong. You open your banking app on a Tuesday night for no reason at all, and there's a purchase from 3 weeks ago you don't even remember making, some late night impulse click that felt necessary at 11 p.m. and feels like a stranger's decision now. You pick up your phone to check 1 notification and 40 minutes disappear and you can't even tell anyone what you did with them. None of this is a character flaw, it's a pattern, and patterns can be interrupted. But first, notice the cost, because most people never actually total the bill. Every reactive word you regret costs you credibility you have to rebuild. Every mood you let hijack you costs you hours of a day you don't get back. Every impulsive dollar costs you a future option you'll want later and won't have. Every hour your attention leaks costs you the compound interest of a life you could have built with that same hour, repeated daily for years. This is not about willpower, it's about where you're leaking and how long you've let it go unnoticed. Marcus Aurelius, a man who ran an empire and buried people he loved while doing it, kept coming back to one blunt observation in his private notebook. Other people's actions are not your business, your response is the only property you actually own. He wasn't writing a productivity tip, he was reminding himself daily, because he needed the reminder daily, that the emperor could lose everything external and still control the 1 square inch that mattered, how he chose to meet it. If a man with that much power still had to fight for control of his own mouth, mood and mind, it should tell you something about how hard this actually is and how little it has to do with circumstance. So here's the core idea, and it's simple enough to say in 1 line: mastery isn't the absence of impulse, it's the presence of a gap between impulse and action. And everything in this video is really about widening that gap in 4 different arenas of your life. That's it. Not suppression. Not becoming cold or numb or someone who never feels anger, sadness, temptation, or distraction. This has nothing to do with pretending you don't have a reaction. You will still feel the sting of an insult, the pull of a purchase, the ache of a bad mood, the itch to check your phone. The mastery is entirely in what happens in the half second after that, whether you act on the first impulse or the version of you that shows up 2 seconds later after you've actually thought. And this directly opposes what modern culture rewards. We live in a culture that worships the unfiltered reaction, the savage comeback, the viral rant, the I said what I said energy that gets applause online and costs you relationships offline. We reward instant gratification with next day delivery and infinite scroll, engineered by people whose entire job is to shrink your gap between impulse and action to 0, because a shrink gap is a monetized gap. Self-mastery in this environment is quietly rebellious. It is not the same as being passive agreeable or a pushover. A disciplined mouse can still say something devastating. A disciplined mood can still include real anger. A disciplined wallet can still spend big on the right things, and a disciplined mind can still go all in on something worthwhile. The discipline isn't in restriction, it's in the choosing. Let's start with the one that costs you the fastest and the most visibly: your mouse. Picture this. You're in a group chat, or a family dinner, or a meeting, and someone says something that lands wrong. Maybe it's a joke at your expense that isn't really a joke. Maybe it's a correction in front of people you wanted to look good in front of. There's a window, usually less than 2 seconds, where your body wants to fire back. Immediately, where the retort is already forming, sharp and satisfying, sitting right there on your tongue. And in that window, most people don't choose to speak. Speech happens to them. The mouse moves before the person decides anything. And by the time they've registered what they said, it's already out in the room, doing damage they can't undo. Epictetus, who had spent part of his life enslaved before becoming one of the most respected teachers in Rome, built his entire philosophy around one distinction. Some things are within your power and some things are not. And almost all suffering comes from confusing the two. Your reputation, other people's opinions of you, whether they apologize, whether they understand your side, none of that is within your power. What you say next is entirely within your power. He used to tell his students to imagine a bowl of food falling and spilling. You can rage about the mess or you can start cleaning it up. The words already spoken to you are the spill. Your reply is the only thing you actually control. There's a well-documented psychological pattern behind that 2-second window. And it's worth knowing by name, the amygdala hijack, where a perceived threat, even a social one, like an insult, triggers your brain's alarm system faster than your slower, reasoning brain can weigh in. Your body is preparing you to fight a predator using the same wiring it would use for an actual physical attack. Except the predator here is a comment in a group chat. The reframe is this: your urge to snap back isn't a moral failure, it's biology running an outdated program, and the fact that you feel the urge says nothing about your character, only what you do in the next 2 seconds does. Starting today, build yourself a physical pause, not a metaphorical one, an actual physical one. Put your tongue against the roof of your mouth or press your thumb into your palm. Anything that forces a half second of friction between the sting and the sentence. In that half second, ask yourself one question. Will this sentence still feel worth saying in 10 minutes? Most of the time, the honest answer is no, and that answer alone will save you more relationships than any apology ever has. Here's a question worth sitting with for a second before we move on. How many of your worst regrets from the last year were things you did versus things you said? For most people, it's not close. The mouse is the cheapest weapon you own, which is exactly why it does the most damage. There's no reload time, no cooldown, nothing standing between the thought and the wound except you. Now let's go one level deeper, because controlling your mouse is really just the visible symptom of something underneath it, your mood. A sharp word is usually just a bad mood finding an exit. You know the day. You wake up already behind bad sleep, an argument replaying in your head from the night before. Traffic that eats into a morning that was already too tight. By 9 a.m., you're not having a bad moment, you're wearing a bad mood like a jacket you didn't choose to put on, and it colors every interaction after it. You snap at a coworker over something trivial. You read a neutral text as passive-aggressive. You come home and you're short with the people who love you most, the ones who did nothing to deserve the version of you that walks through the door. And the cruelest part is that none of them caused it. The mood arrived hours earlier and just needed somewhere to land. Seneca, writing letters to a friend late in his life, made an observation that still holds up. We suffer more in imagination than in reality, and most of what ruins a day never actually happened. It's a rehearsal of something that might happen, or a replay of something that already did, neither of which is present tense reality. He wasn't saying your feelings are fake. He was pointing out that the mood often outlives its course by hours, sometimes days, because you keep feeding it with your own thoughts long after the original event ended. There's a real psychological mechanism at work here called affect labeling. Simply naming an emotion out loud or even just in your head measurably reduces its grip on you, because it moves the processing from the reactive, emotional part of your brain into the more regulated, verbal part. That's the entire trick, and it costs nothing. The reframe: you are not your mood, you are the person who notices the mood, and that noticing is where your actual power lives. A bad mood isn't a character flaw or a sign something is wrong with you. It's weather passing through, and weather always passes through, whether you fight it or not. Starting today, the moment you catch yourself in a mood, say the sentence out loud, even quietly. I'm noticing irritation right now. Not I am irritated, I am noticing irritation. That tiny shift in language puts distance between you and the mood, and distance is exactly what you needed. If you've made it this far, you're already in a different category than most people who clicked on this video, because you're still here past the point where the easy dopamine hit would have sent you scrolling somewhere else. That alone tells you something about how you're wired. Do me one favor before we go further, hit like on this video, not for me, but because it's the single easiest way to signal to yourself that you're actually invested in finishing this, and it takes the algorithm exactly 1 second to notice and start showing you more of this instead of noise. And remember that thing I said backfires for most people trying to build self-control the obvious way? We're about to get there. Keep going. Now we move somewhere most self-improvement content avoids, because it's uncomfortable in a different way. Your money, not your investment strategy, not your budget spreadsheet, the actual moment of the spend. It's 11:40 p.m. You're lying in bed, phone 6 inches from your face, and you've been scrolling for 20 minutes with no real goal. Something appears, a product, a course, a limited drop, a sale ends tonight countdown, and your sum is moving toward buy now before you've consciously decided anything. It's not really about the item. You know somewhere underneath that you're tired or bored or replaying that argument from earlier, and the purchase is functioning as a release valve, a tiny hit of control in a day where you felt like you had none. The item arrives 3 days later and you barely remember wanting it. Marcus Aurelius kept returning to a version of the same idea. Ask yourself, of the thing in front of you, is this necessary? And if it isn't, be willing to cut it away, the same way you trim anything unnecessary from an action or a thought. He wasn't anti-pleasure. He was anti-unconscious action, spending or otherwise, action taken without first asking the question. The psychological concept underneath this one is well known. Hedonic adaptation, the process by which the pleasure from any purchase, achievement or acquisition fades back to your baseline mood far faster than you expect it to. The new item doesn't fail you, it does exactly what it was always going to do, which is stop feeling new. The reframe. The problem was never the desire for something good, it's that you were using an external purchase to regulate an internal state, and no purchase has ever been built that can do that job permanently. Starting today, install one rule between you and any non-essential purchase over a set amount you choose, a 24-hour waiting period. No exceptions, no matter how urgent the countdown timer claims to be. If you still want it tomorrow, with a clear head, buy it without guilt. Most of the time, tomorrow you doesn't even remember what tonight you wanted. Here's the counterintuitive part, and it's worth pausing on. The goal was never to spend less. Plenty of financially disciplined people are miserable, white-knuckling every purchase, tracking every cent out of fear instead of clarity. And that's not mastery either, that's just control wearing a different costume. Real mastery over money looks like spending freely on the small list of things that genuinely compound your life, and feeling nothing at all, no pull, no craving, no late night sum halfway to buy now about the enormous pile of things that don't. That's a completely different relationship to money than restriction, and it's the one worth building. Now we arrive at the deepest layer, the one that actually runs the other three, your mind. Specifically, your attention, because your attention is the resource every other form of self-control is downstream of. You sit down to do one important thing. Maybe it's a message you need to write carefully, or a piece of work that actually matters to your future. 90 seconds in, your phone lights up, or your own thoughts drift, unprompted, towards some argument from 3 days ago that has nothing to do with the task in front of you. You open a new tab just to check one thing, and 45 minutes later you surface disoriented, the original task untouched, unsure how you got from point A to point Z. This isn't a discipline problem in the way most people assume. It's an attention problem. And attention, unlike mood or money, is the resource every single other form of self-mastery depends on, because you cannot pause before your mouth speaks, you cannot notice a mood before it runs you, and you cannot catch a purchase before your thumb moves without attention available to do the noticing in the first place. Epictetus taught his students to treat their own mind as the one possession genuinely theirs, guarded more carefully than gold, because everything else, money, reputation, other people's behavior, could be taken by circumstance, but a trained mind could not be taken by anyone. He wasn't speaking metaphorically. He meant it as literally as a locksmith means a locked door. An untrained mind is an open door, and anyone, an advertiser, an algorithm, A provocateur can walk straight through it and take your day. The psychological framing here is attention residue, a well-documented pattern where switching from one task to another leaves a portion of your cognitive focus still stuck on the previous task, meaning that every quick check of your phone doesn't just cost you the 60 seconds you were on, it costs you a slower, foggier version of yourself for several minutes after you put it down. This is why a day full of fragmented 15-minute focus sessions can leave you exhausted despite accomplishing almost nothing, while a single, uninterrupted 2-hour block leaves you tired in a completely different, more satisfying way. The reframe: you are not lazy and you are not broken, you are operating inside an environment engineered by extremely well-funded teams whose entire job is to fragment your attention, and losing that fight doesn't mean you're weak, it means the fight was never fair to begin with. Starting today, pick one block of time, even 30 minutes, and put your phone in a different room, not on silent, not face down, in a different room entirely, and give that block to exactly one task. Notice how foreign it feels at first. That discomfort is the muscle waking up. So here's the turn, the part I told you about at the very start of this video, the reason, the obvious approach to all 4 of these backfires for almost everyone who tries it. The obvious approach is to grip tighter, bite your tongue harder, force the good mood, white-knuckle the budget. Fight your phone with sheer willpower, staring it down like an enemy. And it fails almost every time for a very specific reason. Willpower is a finite resource that depletes across the day, and every one of those 4 fights is competing for the exact same depleting resource by 8 p.m. After a full day of biting your tongue, resisting purchases, forcing your mood, and fighting your phone through raw force, you have nothing left, and that's precisely when the reactive comment slips out, the impulse buy happens, the mood wins, the phone wins. You didn't fail because you're weak. You fail because you are fighting 4 separate wars with one finite army all day, every day. Here's the paradox, and it's the whole video in one sentence. You don't get control over your mouth, mood, money, and mind. By gripping them harder, you get control by widening the gap between stimulus and response just once, at the level of attention, and that single widened gap automatically improves all 4, because attention was never 4 separate problems. It was one problem wearing 4 different masks. The pause before you speak, the naming of the mood, the 24 hours before the purchase, the phone in the other room. None of these are 4 different disciplines. They are the exact same discipline, practiced in 4 different rooms of your life. Master the pause once, and you don't need 4 separate willpower reserves. You need one, trained daily, in whichever room happens to test you that day. This is why the people who seem effortlessly composed aren't fighting harder than you. They've stopped fighting on 4 fronts and started training on one. Picture this version of you 6 months from now. Someone insults you in a meeting, and there's a beat of silence before you respond, not because you're suppressing rage, but because the rage simply doesn't own you the way it used to, and what comes out instead is calm, precise, and somehow more devastating than any retort would have been. You wake up already behind schedule, the same way anyone does, and you notice the irritation rising, name it quietly, and watch it pass through you in minutes instead of hours, leaving the people around you untouched by a mood that was never theirs to inherit. You open your banking app at the end of the month, and there's nothing in there that surprises you, no mystery charge from a version of you that made a decision at midnight, because that version of you doesn't make decisions anymore. The 24-hour version does. You sit down to work, and the phone is in another room, and 2 hours pass, and you emerge not exhausted but sharpened, having actually finished something for once in one continuous piece. The world doesn't get quieter. People still say cruel things. Bad days still arrive uninvited. Sales still count down with red timers designed by people paid to break you. Your phone still lights up. None of that stops. What changes is the size of the gap between the stimulus and your response, and that gap, once it's wide enough, is the only home mastery has ever needed. Here's your challenge, and it starts today, not Monday, not when things calm down today. For the next 7 days, pick exactly one of these 4, mouse, mood, money, or mind, the one that costs you the most right now, the one you already know is bleeding you the fastest. For 7 days, install one pause before it. The physical pause before you speak. The naming out loud before the mood runs you. The 24 hours before you buy. The phone in the other room before you start. 1 pause, 1 area, 7 days. Say this line to yourself if you need to remember why. You don't control your mouse, your mood, your money, or your mind. By gripping them, you control them by widening the one gap that runs underneath all 4. That's the entire video in a single sentence, and it's yours now. If this landed the way I think it did, do one thing for me: comment the word gap. Just that, right now, before you close this tab, because it tells me exactly which of you are actually going to try this instead of just watching it, and it helps this reach someone else who's exhausted from fighting 4 wars they didn't know were actually won. Subscribe if you want the rest of the series, because mastery isn't a video, it's a rebuild, and we're just getting started. Thank you for staying to the end. Genuinely, that's rarer than people think. Stay disciplined, stay free.